Hey everyone, it's Mr. Davitt here. I hope everyone's doing well. Since I'm on the conference and I don't want you guys to miss out on the fun action, I've decided to video this lesson. So if you remember thus far in this unit, we began by discussing the causes of World War One. Then last class we moved into kind of the major realm of fighting and we covered the first roughly 2 years of fighting. And we talked about a particular battle, the Battle of the Somme, and we did some primary sources in regards to that. Today, what we're going to be exploring is some of the continued fighting that occurs through World War One. And actually, after today, we will be completed with the actual fighting of World War One. Now, I need to stress this when we talk about World War One. When the fighting ends, there's still a lot that has to happen. So we'll be looking at that as we continue through here. But anyways, the point of today's lesson is to really get into this war even in more detail and see why it finally ends in November of 1918. All right, we're going to start by looking at fighting in the Middle East. So far, what we've looked at is that war has been primarily in Europe, but there is fighting that goes on beyond Europe that we need to spend some time talking about. The best example of the fighting that occurs in the Middle East is known as the Gallipoli Campaign. What is this? And you can see it on the map, the Gallipoli Peninsula over in the Ottoman Empire or Turkey. This area, remember the Ottoman Empire does join the Central Powers, relatively weak Central Power, is going to be attacked by the Allies. Now, they're obviously trying to defeat the Ottoman Empire, but that's not really their main objective. Their main objective is to try to get a supply line over to Russia. Remember, Russia, very poorly industrialized, having trouble getting their men food, guns, armor, etc. And remember also that Russia is really isolated from their main allies, Britain and France, because of their location in the eastern part of Europe. And so because of that, that's going to be the attempt here to get that supply line over to Russia. This will be a disaster and a loss of life here for the Allies, and the Allies are going to be forced to give this campaign up. Very disappointing. What we see basically happening here is Britain and France kind of tell Russia, hey, sorry, we're not going to be able to get the supplies over to you. Do your best, do what you can, and we're going to see that really is going to be incredibly problematic for Russia. At this point, Russia has been alone. Now they're really alone. So again, the issues that they've been having are just going to continue, and they're not going to necessarily go away. So we want to be looking at that. The other thing that's occurring within the Ottoman Empire is Arab nationalists are fighting basically guerrilla-type warfare against the Ottoman Empire. And they're looking for their independence as well. We already know the Ottoman Empire really, really weak. Again, the goal for these groups is not necessarily to just rid of the Ottoman Empire. The overall goal is for independence, and again, an independent Arab state in the Middle East. And so that's definitely an expectation that these groups have, especially because they will be successful in defeating the Ottoman Empire. This, by the way, is a look at some of these Arab nationalists, and included in this picture is T.E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia. He was a British intelligence officer who helped these people out. It's relatively fascinating. You can see him here on the right side, the second guy in. That's T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia. They made a very famous movie about him, in case you're curious. All right, let's talk about some of the fighting that's occurring elsewhere, because again, we focus mainly on the Western and Eastern Front, but a couple other things that we want to be looking at. Okay, so if you remember, Italy, originally part of that Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. When war begins, they first decide to be neutral, and then within about a year, they will actually join in on the Allied side. That being the case, Italy is not going to be incredibly important for the wartime. They don't really fight much on the Western Front or on the Eastern Front, but they do hope to be a world power. They have not really been included in that conversation thus far. Spoiler, they're really not going to be after this either. But nonetheless, that's their hope and that's their desire. Again, what they are going to do in terms of assistance to the Allied power is going to be relatively minimal and small. However, the fighting that occurs on the Italian front, you see here on the map here, which is mainly going to be between Italy and Austria-Hungary, will divert away some necessary Austrian-Hungary resources from their fighting on the Eastern Front. And again, we know that Austria-Hungary is already having problems on the East. They can't beat Russia, so them having to fight against Italy will also be problematic for them. So in that regard, again, although Italy not really doing much on the Eastern Front or the Western Front, for Europe, the fact that they are a pressure against Austria-Hungary will play an impact into this war. All right, the other thing that's going to happen is, remember, Germany has colonies in Africa and Asia, so the Allied powers will send boats and will send troops over to attack those colonial possessions. The reality is the Allied powers are able to take over these German colonies relatively easily. That should make a lot of sense to us at this point. Remember that Germany is already doing all the fighting in Europe. So the fact of the matter is that they really just can't send more, troops, etc., over to their colonies in Africa and Asia. They're just way too bogged down as is. So that's going to be the case that comes into play here. The Allied powers are also going to recruit their own colonists to fight in the war. Colonists in Africa, Asia, because of the fact that, remember, such big losses of life, realizing that, more men is going to really help them be able to fight this war successfully. With that being the case, why, if you were a colonist who has been imperialized, and we just spend so much time talking about imperialism, why would they want to help the imperial country? Well, the answer has to do with they hoped that if they contributed to the fighting, they would be able to get their independence and self-rule after the war. So again, they think, hey, we're going to help them out. And then once this war is done, they're going to say, thanks, here's your independence. You're free here. Spoiler, really not going to happen. And it's going to make a lot of people upset. So we need to be keeping that in mind. Again, so much of World War I is about misconceptions and this, what people hope versus what actually is. So we need to be cautious on that. And here, by the way, you can see the map. Again, you see the battles obviously occurring on the Western Eastern Front. You also see the battles taking place on the Italian front, the Garibaldi campaign, etc. So all things to be looking at. And again, this is a war that really is a world war. Here, by the way, are some African troops that will be fighting on the Allied side. And again, these various countries do designate quite a few troops. So we need to remember that and remember their contributions. Too often, so easily glossed over. Okay, some people have asked thus far, hey, wait a minute, what's going on with the United States? Well, let's talk about the United States. Okay, when war first breaks out, the United States decides to be neutral. We've talked about this thus far, but the overall attitude was this war is a European war, all right? It does not involve us as the United States. However, when war begins, the United States will be trading with the Allied powers, all right? So it's hard to say you're neutral when you're trading with countries at war and you're really only trading with one side, all right? A lot of trading with Britain, a lot of trading with France, no trading with Germany. And again, that's obviously not really neutral, okay? But at least at the beginning of the war, they're not actually sending troops. They're just trading. What's starting to happen is, as a kind of point of war here, Germany will be conducting what is known as unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany has these submarines, they're called U-boats, and basically one of their war strategies is, and why it's called unrestricted, is because basically any ship traveling across the Atlantic, they are going to fire upon, even if it's not necessarily a ship involved with the war. Well, why is this relevant? Because the United States, they're trading back and forth across the Atlantic. In 1915, a British ship that has American passengers on it, known as the Lusitania, will be sunk. And this is going to lead to a lot of cries within the United States. Oh, we must avenge the sinking of the Lusitania. This is such a travesty. How could this be, etc. And there's other ships that are sunk, by the way. The Lusitania is just kind of the most famous one. With the United States being so upset, they're going to basically say to Germany, hey, look, you better cut this out or else we're going to join into the war. And there's other people that are also saying, hey, look, you can't just fire indiscriminately on ships. There needs to be some rules here. And so with this pressure and things like that, Germany will suspend their unrestricted submarine warfare for a period of time. And at that point, things are a little bit calmer, all right, and things are a little bit safer. However, in 1917, the Germans decide to resume the unrestricted submarine warfare policy, and as they do, just like before, more U.S. ships will be sunk, which again is going to lead to anger, resentment, all those kind of bad emotions within the United States. There's more pressure on the United States in 1917 to enter into the war. They're just not quite there. However, with the sinking of more U.S. ships, that's going to put them pretty close. The other thing that's going to put them close is a telegram that is intercepted by the British, and it's known as the Zimmerman telegram. In this telegram, which was from Germany to Mexico, the United States' southern neighbor, obviously, what happened was Germany said, hey, if you invade and attack the United States, join in the war on our side, we'll give you your land back that you lost in the Mexican-American War. You'll learn more about this war next year, but in the Mexican-American War, if you don't remember from grade school, the United States gained Mexican territories such as California, they gained Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, etc. So a big piece of land. With that being the case, this telegram, very controversial. There's some that argue that it didn't even exist, and if it did, that it wasn't actually legitimate. Mexico was going through their own revolution. They were not really involved here in the wartime. However, this is going to be the final push for the United States to enter in. They were already close to the Allies anyway. Now they're going to be in the war in 1917. So again, by the time they join, war's already been going on. There's already been a lot of destruction, etc. But what's important to realize is that the United States is really going to be impactful as they really provide those fresh set of legs, coming into the wartime. So, I guess better late than never. But as you're seeing here, the United States, even though technically neutral at the beginning, were doing things that not exactly neutral. This, by the way, just so you know what these U-boats kind of look like. Again, very small underground little submarines, and they would just pop out very unexpected and fire upon ships. And then as soon as they fired, they would sail away very quickly. So very hard to catch, etc. And these were the boats that were sinking U.S. ships. And this, by the way, is a look at the sinking of the Lusitania. This is a British ship, but it had American passengers on board. It was a passenger ship, but what was interesting was actually on board the ship were supplies for the Allied side, kind of, undercover type deal. So again, not actually a neutral ship. Not to say that the lives lost, still a travesty, but just, some things not exactly what they seem. And again, we see the headline here. I'll tell you something kind of interesting. You'll see this more next year. The United States, there's kind of something that happens. Oftentimes, the United States involves themselves in war due to a sinking of a ship. It's just something random that happens quite a little bit in United States history. So just, interesting, I suppose. And this, by the way, is supposed to depict the Zimmermann telegram. You can see here, this is Germany carving out this area of the United States, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, California, for Mexico. And then there was some discussion that maybe they would try to get Japan to join in the war on their side as well, for California. And again, this telegram heavily disputed, especially because even if it was real, it wasn't really a legitimate threat. Mexico very busy doing their stuff, not really having much time to enter into a war of this magnitude. And here we see April 6, 1917. This is officially when the United States will enter into the war. Remember, war for the other powers basically begins August of 1914, so almost 3 years later, when the United States finally jumps in. World War One is unique in a lot of ways, but one of the ways in particular that it's unique is because World War One is what we define as a total war. And we really don't see many total wars throughout history, so it's worthy of noting what exactly is a total war. Okay, so World War One is an example of a total war. What exactly does this mean? In simplest terms, all efforts and resources of a country go to the war effort. All right. You guys lived during a war in the United States, the Iraq War. And what you probably know is that unless you knew somebody who served overseas, your life probably wasn't much affected by the war. All right. However, in a total war, everyone's life is impacted, even if you don't actually serve. So it's a relatively fascinating dynamic that comes on here. Every country kind of does something a little bit different when it comes to total war, how exactly they make it total. But there are a few common characteristics that we see throughout. One is that the government typically takes control of the economy. And this is very fascinating. Even governments that usually are not involved in this, they're going to tell factories, hey, look, you need to produce this good now, all right? And you need to produce this much of this good. All right, it's a really fascinating thing, but again, you need all these resources for the wartime. This is what's deemed as being necessary. They take control of the factories. They tell factories what goods to consume. They also tell the people this, etc. So again, government very active role during the total war time. Another dynamic or characteristic of total war is that soldiers are drafted. You need so many people to fight. You can't just rely on volunteers. So this is where you have a draft, where again, men, it depends the ages, but in many countries from 18 to 35, 18 to 45 are eligible to be drafted. By the way, the formal term for drafting is known as conscription. So that's why I held the word there. And that's a word you're going to hear more of as we get into World War II, but you need to do this in order to get enough people to serve. All right, another thing that the government usually does is they employ rationing. And again, this varies from country to country, but what the idea behind this is that you cannot eat so much of a certain food, or you cannot consume, these goods specific, because the idea is you need to save certain goods and you make sure you have enough for your soldiers and for the war effort. So this is what I'm talking about. Your life is very much impacted even if you're not actually fighting because of rationing. The government also needs money quickly to fight in a war of this magnitude, and so what they do is they issue out war bonds. Basically, in a war bond, you give the government X amount of dollars, they now have your money, and in return, you get back basically a slip, and it's known as a war bond. That slip is basically worth no money to you. However, over time, the war bond is supposed to mature, so it's supposed to equal its money, and then with interest and things like that, even a little bit more. So that's the idea behind the war bonds. It's like an investment. The other thing about war bonds, by the way, is you're trying to motivate people to care about the war as well. Again, your main goal is to raise money, but if you have literally money invested in the war, you certainly want your country to win. So that just adds that other element to it. We also see the government uses things like propaganda. And again, we'll be looking at this. You're actually going to do propaganda assignment, create your own little piece of unique propaganda. But these are posters, as you see here, and other things to try to make sure support for the war is at 100%. You don't want anyone questioning the war. You don't want anyone saying, oh, geez, I think we're losing. I don't know if we should fight anymore. No, you try to get that all out of people's vocabulary and out of their kind of thought process, etc. And one of the ways you do this is through propaganda, almost like advertisements for various components of the war. This one here, looking for people from the United States to sign up for the U.S. Army. Again, you do all these things in order to try to keep support for the war as high as possible. Again, you want to think about this. Your life is impacted, all right? Because of the war, you're not going to be able to eat certain goods and other things like that. You might have to change jobs. Everything changes. So the hope here for the government is you can make sure everyone has these very positive energies and people are excited and happy. I wanted to show you some specific propaganda. This, by the way, from World War One, from Britain. Who's absent? Is it you? All right. Oh my gosh. Maybe I should join in here. Okay, that's because they're trying to invoke people, kind of get people thinking. There's still a place in the line for you. Will you fit it? It's reserved for a fit man. Pressure, pressure. All right. This is really interesting. We are saving you. You save food. Well-fed soldiers will win the war. Certain countries during World War One, like for example Russia, they actually impose a maximum caloric intake, so its citizens are not allowed to have a certain amount of calories per day. And then in other countries like the United States, it's more so telling people, hey, look, save your food. All right, don't waste food. Only eat what you can get, etc. Here is this one, kind of some more guilt treatment. It is nice in the surf, but what about the men in the trenches? Go and help. Geez, maybe I should join. That's what they're trying to get you to be thinking about through the propaganda. This one's so fascinating. Gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy, Naval Reserve, or Coast Guard. Okay, geez, some more pressure. Remember, women still not allowed to serve in the military at this point, so that's what they're trying to kind of push here. A couple other things. These are for the war bonds. That liberty shall not perish from the earth. Buy Liberty bonds. So interesting. The United States are literally going to call them Liberty bonds because they don't want to call them war bonds. So kind of puts another spin to it. And again, now with this, not only does the government get money right away, but also now more people are invested in the war effort because they have to. They literally put up money for it. This, by the way, is from the Food Administration, a U.S. Government organization set up during World War One in order to try to get people to conserve their food. And so they have these kind of 6 steps, and the biggest thing: don't waste the food. All right, don't waste it. You're going to be mad. And here, by the way, we see some more. Enlist, destroys non-brute, wake up, America, civilization calls every man, woman, and child. You are involved, you are active. And just a couple more. This one I always find fascinating. Defeat the Kaiser and his U-boats. Victory depends on which fails first, food or frightfulness. When you first see this, you're like, what? Food or fright? What? And then it says, eat less wheat. Dang, powerful. Here's some more. Be patriotic. Sign your country's pledge to save the food. And this one from the American Red Cross. Our boys need socks. Knit your bit. Fascinating stuff that's coming in. But this propaganda is effective in mobilizing the population for public support. Getting volunteers for the army. Getting people to buy war bonds and other things like that. Okay, so now it's an important time for us to make a couple comments about women. Again, I kind of did a little bit going through the propaganda, but there are some other things specifically we want to bring to mind here. Okay, so first off, remember World War One is total war. Because of that, you have a lot of men fighting And so what this means now is women now have to work because they have to take up the jobs that so many men have left behind. And again, up to this point, it's not like women had never worked. Women had worked, a little bit in the factories and things like that. But more so the idea of woman was to, raise the family and, you know, raise kids and be more of a supportive figure to her husband. Now, all of a sudden, women are going to be forced into the workplace here. Again, what's the primary work that women are going to do? Factory work, which really, since the Industrial Revolution and all that poverty that we talked about, has been reserved really for men. And so now women have to take up a very big role in this. Women will also do some jobs related to the war, in particular as nurses and some other clerical stuff for some of the military organization and things like that. So we do see this. Again, here's a look from the American Red Cross for women's involvement in the wartime. But again, for the most part, it's doing the factory work, other things of that nature. With that being said, although something like World War I, women working in factories might seem like a positive for a woman's rights, the reality is these jobs are not long lasting. And instead, once the war ends, basically the men come back. And then the idea is, thanks, woman, but we don't really need you anymore. So kind of a sad long-term stretch for progress. However, in kind of a thank you for helping out with the wartime, in most allied countries, places like Britain, France, the United States, after the war ends, women gain suffrage. Remember, suffrage is the right to vote. So think of where we've gone in this course. We talked about how originally it was adult male citizens who had lots of property. They were the only ones that were able to vote. Then there was the lessening of the property requirement until basically we get to the point of the late 1800s, where in most allied countries, all men have the right to vote. And then by World War I's and now women have the right to vote as well. And again, this is still a long way to go for equality. And here, by the way, is some World War I women. They're working in the mines. So again, this is usually was work that was considered for men. So, but again, because of what's going on, women expected and necessary to take on a bigger role here. All right. The last time we talked about Russia, it was really a problem, what was going on there because of their lack of industrialization. If you remember, estimated about 30% of Russian soldiers didn't have weapons. I mean, that's just horrendous. Now let's go back to Russia because sadly for them, things have not gotten any better. All right, what you want to realize is that for the Allies, and the United States entering, they're at a massive advantage, all right? Because now you have this new country coming in. They're a relatively strong country. They have not been bogged down for the last almost 3 years of wartime. And so that's really significant. Russia, by the time the U.S. enters, is still fighting. The problem is, though, that they are having some very serious problems. In particular, famine, still, very low industrialization. They have more deaths than really any other country at this point by a lot. And so it's a really bad deal. And again, we'll be talking more about Russia next unit, but it is important to realize for the wartime, they just can't get it together. And their government has forced them to fight in this war. And so many Russians are saying, look, we should not be fighting. Okay, we have no business fighting in this war. We're just, we're no match. We're not industrialized. We don't have enough, supplies in order to make this possible. I mean, they're saying this in Russian, of course, but those messages and those ideas in mind. Because of the increasing pressure inside of Russia and kind of the negativity. And it's not just from the war, but it's primarily from the war. The Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, will resign. And he's really going to be given the blame for fighting in this war. What's interesting is that they put a new government into play here, and the new government continues to fight in the war. And so when they do that, now the people are even more upset. They say, look, we just got rid of this old government because they were still fighting in the war. But now we're still fighting. So this doesn't resolve any problems. We need to fix this. And so now the people are even angrier or upset. Who's more upset than just the standard Russian people is going to be the Russian soldiers who basically say, we're done. We're not going to fight anymore. All right. And that's what this image is depicting. These are Russian soldiers deserting from the front lines because they're saying, hey, look, we're just going to die. Right? We don't have guns. We don't have food, anything like that. We're not going to go through this anymore. Inside of Russia, what's going to occur is a revolution that's literally going to wipe out that old government and introduce a brand new type of country. And again, we'll be talking about this more next unit, but this is a big change from really anything we've ever seen. One of the reasons why is because the person that leads this revolution, his name Vladimir Lenin, represents a group known as the Bolsheviks. And this group is actually a communist group. So with him taking power and taking over Russia, Russia in 1918 or 1917 will become the first communist country of the world. And so this is really going to get people freaked out. Again, we'll talk more about this later on, but for World War I's sake, one of the first things that Lenin does when he comes to power is he signs this treaty known as the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany and gets Russia out of the war. And so now, all of a sudden, by the later part of 1917, Russia is not a player in World War I. And so, again, kind of a crazy dynamic that's occurred there. This, by the way, is Vladimir Lenin, very popular. And again, we'll be talking more about him next unit, but he does represent this Bolshevik Communist Party that will take over Russia. And this, by the way, is map. This map is going to show you the area lost by Russia in this Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. And again, it's quite a significant amount of territory that they give to Germany because, hey, look, we're not fighting anymore. Here you go. Later on, this area will actually not be given to Germany. It's going to become other kind of countries, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So with Russia exiting, Germany now no longer has to fight a two-front war. Okay, so now all the German troops can go to the Western Front. And we've been hitting on this, and we're saying that was such a big problem for Russia that they had to fight two-front war, and now all of a sudden they don't. Isn't everything just going to get better? Aren't they just going to win now? No, because of the fact that it's just basically much too late. The reality is when the Germans troops come to the Western Front, Germany will achieve some small victories. The reality is, though, those small victories are nothing in comparison to the fact that they're incredibly exhausted from fighting so long and really fighting in large part by themselves because they're such weak allies. And they're also really out of resources and supplies. The Allied powers, they placed a blockade over Germany, basically blocking trade inside of it, and that has really hurt Germany up to this point. So it's not a good situation for them at all. With really everything on the line and just kind of nothing to lose because defeat seems imminent, what we're going to see next is that Germany is going to make one last and final attack to France, right? And they say, this is going to be it, all right? We're going to put all our troops together. We're going to go this all-out offensive into France. The reality is they will actually advance, and they advance pretty far. However, because it's such this big push, they're actually going to overextend themselves, and when they do, it's able to be pushed back. It's really here where we see that those U.S. troops coming in are very significant because they're that fresh kind of set of energy, fresh set of legs that are going to be able to really kind of put the final nail in the coffin for Germany. And so that's really something that we see out of here. Germany is going to lose their advancement. They're going to be pushed out of France and then into Germany. Not very far into Germany, but at least a little bit into Germany. With defeat seeming like it was going to happen, the Kaiser Wilhelm II, who we already knew was, not the best Kaiser by any means, he will make the decision to resign. And the new German government that comes in, what they're going to do, they're going to establish an armistice. Now, this is another important key term. What is an armistice? An armistice means an end to the fighting, all right? So again, the reason why it's not the end of war necessarily is because they still need to establish a peace treaty for this war that's now gone on for 4+ years at this point, November of 1918. All right, but again, you can imagine you can't have a peace treaty if the sides are still fighting. Right, that would be very, very strange. So in the same way, that's what they're trying to do here: establish the armistice, end the fighting. You can also see here on the map, it goes pretty quickly. Late September, the first major Central Power, Bulgaria, surrenders. And then you can see by November 11th, Germany surrenders. Kind of interesting. The armistice that's signed is on the 11th day of November, which is the 11th month. And it's signed at 11 o'clock. 11, 11, 11. Crazy times we live in, folks. Crazy times. Again, what you want to be thinking about here is that this does not necessarily finalize anything. There still needs to be some bigger peace treaty because of just how, crazy this war has been and how, much has been lost. And, that still needs to be decided. Okay, so that's not there in November of 1918. But at least in November of 1918, the fighting overall is going to stop. Here, by the way, we see this from a Baltimore newspaper. Germany surrenders. Okay, let's talk about the legacy of World War I so we can get a little bit of a better understanding for this. All right, remember when we're talking about World War I, this is a new type of war. All right, it's a total war. We saw trench warfare. We also saw all those new technologies that were used. All right, the machine guns, the grenades, mines, the heavy artillery, first use of planes, first use of tanks. I mean, a pretty wild stuff that's going on here. With this new technology and with these improvements, what this also means is that there is a massive loss of life when we talk about World War I. You can see here some of the numbers, and I'm going to show you on the last slide another image that really shows this. But you can see just massive amount of just deaths alone here. It's pretty severe. The other thing, by the way, and we'll talk about this more next class, at the same time war is basically ending, there's this big flu that is going to basically hit all of Europe and the United States, and that's going to kill an additional, tens of millions of people. So really kind of wild deal. So again, a lot of devastation. There are some civilians that are killed in World War I, but it's relatively small number. So again, it mainly is confined to military fatalities. However, some civilians, non-combatants, are going to be killed in the crossfires. That's obviously always something you're trying to minimize during the wartime. The other thing is that this war has cost a lot of money, all right, between, all the troops, having to pay them, feed them, etc. But it's also caused a lot of destruction on farmland that, can't necessarily be used anymore because of all this. And so that's kind of bringing another question into play. Okay, well, who's going to pay for this, right? How's that going to look? Okay, so again, all these things have to be considered. Again, the destruction primarily in France, because remember, that's where the Western Front is, but also a lot of destruction over on the Eastern Front with Russia and things like that. The biggest legacy of World War I is the Treaty of Versailles, which is the peace treaty that will be decided on about 6 months after World War I. And that's really where we're going to take place from when we have a full lesson on the Treaty of Versailles itself and what it establishes. But as long as we finish the war, I just wanted to make a couple comments about the general kind of legacy of World War I. All right, this is that data I was showing you. And again, you can see here every single country, how many people were mobilized, how many people killed or died, wounded. Again, these are, they're not perfect numbers, but you can get a pretty good sense of what's going on. This last box is casualties percentage of mobilized. So basically, what percentage of your troops are either killed, dead, wounded, prisoner, missing in action during the wartime. Well, look at that. I mean, Russia, 76%. If you go down to the bottom, Austria, Hungary, 90% of their people that fight are going to suffer some type of casualty. So it's a pretty insane situation that occurs here, but something we need to acknowledge. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And now you can go ahead and work on some of these World War I questions so we can see this a little bit better. Have a great one. Bye.